The rain hammered against the rusty tin roof like relentless blows from an iron mallet. Wind whistled through the narrow gap in the door, dragging in cold mist and the earthy smell of wet soil, typical of the borderlands. In the small, crooked house near the edge of the forest, the oil lamp flickered, casting trembling shadows across the gaunt face of the foster mother, the woman who had saved more wandering souls than she could remember. She sat right beside the rickety bamboo bed, her hands trembling as she struggled to bandage Truong's wound. Blood from his shoulder continued to seep through the faded old blanket. The metallic smell of blood, mixed with the scent of the rain, made the room feel suffocatingly heavy. The foster mother bent down, her voice hoarse from fear and exhaustion. "Hold on, child. If I'd come a little later, you wouldn't have survived." Her veined hands shook as she tightened the final strip of cloth. In all her years living out here, she had seen people running from the law, running from death, running from themselves. But none had ever frightened her like this. Truong's wound was deep. He had lost too much blood, and when she found him, his breath had been barely there. She had dragged him back through the storm with the last of her strength. On the bed, Truong shifted slightly, his breathing heavy, as though a boulder were pressed against his chest. His eyelids twitched, then slowly parted. His gaze was cloudy, at first vacant, lost like a man just pulled back from the brink of death. 1 second later, it was as if a locked door inside his mind burst open. Memories surged back all at once, violent, chaotic, raging, like a storm that had been held back too long. Lytieunu? Her figure flashed before him, clutching little Diêp in her arms, running through the gray curtain of rain, her panicked face calling his name over and over. Footsteps slipping through the mud. The moment she turned back, fear blazing in her eyes, yet still trying to stay strong. The unfinished wedding, the happiest day of his life, torn apart in a breath. He could still see the scene vividly. The wedding cloth whipping in the wind. Chairs overturned, the cheers cut short and replaced by screams. Then, the face of the man who pointed a gun at him. Cold eyes, utterly unhesitant. The steel of the barrel pressed against his temple. The rain battering his skin, yet the real chill came from the smirk curling on that man's lips. And then, a familiar voice echoed through his mind, sharp and unmistakable. "Finish him. Don't let him ever come back." That voice sliced through the darkness like an axe. A voice he had trusted for years, someone closer than family. But the nightmare did not end there. All the scattered memories gathered into one final image. Not fear, but pure icy indifference. The heavily made-up face, the emotionless eyes, the look of someone staring at something worthless. That expression had pushed Truong right to the edge of life and death. Truong jolted upright, as if yanked from a cliff. He gasped, cold sweat running down his face despite the freezing air. His shoulder burned with pain, but he still pushed himself upright. The foster mother panicked, grabbing him firmly. "Good heavens, lie down. Your wound will tear open." But Truong shook his head hard. His eyes, no longer foggy or lost, were fierce, bloodshot, and filled with painful clarity. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I remember now, Auntie. They tried to kill me. He swallowed breath, trembling, his hands shaking slightly from the shock of recovering what he had lost. I have to go back. Tiêunu. Dui. They're waiting for me. I can't let them live in fear any longer. The foster mother stared at him for a long moment. Her old, weary eyes carried the depth of someone who had witnessed too many tragedies. She placed her thin hand on his shoulder, the wounded one still warm with pain. You almost died. Your body is weak. With anyone else, I would stop them. She paused, her voice slow, but firm, almost solemn. But if you still have something to fight for, someone waiting for you, then I won't hold you back. Truong lowered his head, his breath heavy, but his eyes gleamed as if he had retrieved his very soul from the darkness. Outside, the rain still hammered the rusty roof. But inside this small room, something had shifted. No longer was he a man wandering without memory, a leaf drifting through a storm. No longer was he a victim swallowed by shadows. Truong, with his memories, returned, and his will, burning bright, rose again in the coldest night. He clenched his fists, eyes fixed on the door, as though he could already see through the darkness. He must return. He must protect his family, and he must uncover the one pulling all the strings to end this nightmare once and for all. Night fell over the borderlands with an uncanny stillness. The rain had just stopped, yet the mist lingered in the air, clinging to every leaf and wooden step. The dirt path leading to Truong and Tiêunu's little house was pitch black, lit only by the warm yellow glow spilling from the lone window, a beam of light that looked like it was calling a lost soul home. Truong stopped at the edge of the yard. His legs trembled from the wound, from exhaustion, from months of wandering. But his eyes held a fierce, unbreakable determination. Every step toward the house made his heartbeat pound harder, anxious, afraid, and desperately hopeful. Since the day he vanished, since the day his memories were stolen, he had never felt such an overwhelming yearning to return. A cold gust swept through his torn shirt, making him shiver. But he inhaled deeply and climbed the wooden steps. The door swung open. In the warm, yellow light, Tiêunu stood there. Her face froze in shock, her eyes widening as if she feared the man before her was only a ghost. Her long hair fluttered gently in the breeze, and her trembling hands rose to cover her mouth. A broken breath escaped her, one pulled straight from the deepest part of her heart. Truong, is it really you? Her voice cracked like a long-held sob finally breaking free. Truong didn't answer. Words were useless. He simply stepped forward and pulled her into his arms with every bit of strength left in his body. Tiêunu collapsed against him, her whole body softening, as if she had finally found the place she had been desperately holding out for. Her face pressed into his shoulder as sobs burst out, months of fear, anxiety, despair, crashing together, all at once. His shirt darkened quickly with her tears. Struggling through pain, Truong tightened his arms around her. His voice was weak and hoarse, but every word rang with remorse. I'm sorry, I left you alone for too long. Tiêunu didn't answer. She only held him tighter, as if loosening her grip might make him vanish again. A rustling sound came from inside the house. Little Dewey, still half asleep, rubbed his eyes as he walked out. The yellow light reflected on his tiny face, and his eyes widened when he saw the man standing at the doorway. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then a scream burst out of his small chest. But Daddy, Dewey ran as fast as his tiny legs could carry him, throwing himself around Truong's leg with all the strength of a child who had waited too long. His body trembled with relief, joy, and fear of losing him again. Truong bent down and lifted him, even though the pain in his shoulder was so sharp it made his arm numb. He held his son tight as if trying to make up for every lost day. Dewey wrapped his arms around his neck, pressing his face into his father's shoulder, sobbing. Ba came back. Ba really came back. No one said another word. They didn't need to. This embrace alone was enough to mend wounds that had been carved too deep. A family, once torn apart, stitched together again in a single moment under the night sky. Lytieunu reached out a trembling hand, gently touching the white bandage on Truong's shoulder. Her fingers froze, afraid that even the slightest pressure might unleash all the pain he had endured. Her voice shook, filled with fear and anger she could no longer hold back. What did they do to you? Who hurt you like this? Truong looked at his wife and child for a long time, as if trying to imprint every line of them into his memory. He set Dewey down gently, then took Lytieunu's hand, and for the first time since he disappeared, that touch was whole again. Warm, steady, real. Go inside, love. I'll tell you everything. But Lytieunu shook her head. Her eyes red but unwavering. No, I want to hear it now. I've waited too long already. Truong exhaled slowly. Pain tugged at his shoulder, but it could no longer stop him from speaking the truth. His voice dropped, not loud, not shouting, but sharp as a blade. I'm done running. I'll tell you everything. And I'll end this, all of it. The night wind swept across the yard, scattering droplets from the roof. The warm light from inside the house cast a soft glow on the three of them. A family once shattered, now standing together like an unbreakable unit. Truong clasped Lytieunu's hand tighter, his eyes burning with something she had not seen in him for months. Memory, conviction, and the will to set everything right. He looked down at Dewey, who was clinging to his father's hand as if afraid to lose him again. My boy, I promise, I'll never leave you and Mommy again. Dewey nodded, hard eyes shining. I believe you, Ba. Lytieunu couldn't speak. Her throat closed up. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But a faint smile bloomed, soft, fragile, yet full of hope, like the first ray of light after a storm. In that wooden house, in the eerie quiet of the borderland night, a new chapter began. No more fear, no more running. Only the path Truong must walk into the darkness to finally bring peace back to the two people he loves most in this world. At dawn, the next morning, when the sky was still covered in a thin layer of mist, Truong was already at the district police station. The small office was lit by cold white fluorescent lights spilling over a desk cluttered with files, maps, and cups of steaming coffee. The air in the room was so tense, it felt like you could hear every heartbeat. Truong sat across from the police chief, a middle-aged man with sharp, cautious eyes. The wound in Truong's shoulder still throbbed, but his face was strikingly calm. He took a deep breath before beginning. "Just tell us everything you remember," the chief said, voice deep but firm. Truong nodded, then spoke slowly, as if pulling each fragment of memory from a place still soaked with blood and rain. "I was taken while I was on my way to meet my wife. They threw a sack over my head and dragged me into a small truck. When they took the bag off, I was locked inside a wooden warehouse, deep in a rubber forest." He paused, his hands clasping together tightly. Every officer in the room leaned in, missing no detail. There were 3 of them inside. One had a gun. The other 2 took turns beating me. They asked about land, about money, and about my family. His voice tightened as he said the word family. They told me I knew too much, and that if I disappeared, everything would be solved. He lightly touched the bandage on his shoulder. Then the one with the gun shot me. The bullet grazed my shoulder, but the fall made me hit my head on a wooden beam. I lost my memory. Couldn't remember anything. The room went completely still. Only the sound of pens scribbling across paper broke the silence. Truong looked at the chief, his gaze deep and hollow, like a pit I didn't escape on my own. An old woman, people near the border call her foster mother. She saved me, found me in the heavy rain. If it wasn't for her, I would have died. The chief nodded genuine respect, flickering in his eyes for the unknown woman. Then he stood and signaled an officer to spread out a map. A large map was unrolled across the table, filled with marked trails, rubber forests, escape routes, and border zones. The chief picked up a marker and circled an area to the west, exactly where Truong said he had been held. "This region is dense forest," he said. "Very few people pass through. We've suspected illegal activity there for a long time, but we never had proof. Your testimony may be the key." Another officer added markings, abandoned warehouses, suspicious paths, recent movements. The chief looked Truong straight in the eyes. "We need you to guide us. We'll deploy the team immediately. But there's something more important." He paused, his voice lowering. "This isn't just an attempted murder. Someone gave the order. Someone with power, or with a very big stake in this." Truong exhaled sharply. A vein in his neck tensed. He looked down at the map, then back into the chief's eyes. "I know that man's voice," he said, each word steady and heavy. When my memory returned, I could see his face clearly. The tension in the room shifted tighter, sharper. A few officers stopped writing, waiting for him to continue. But he wasn't working alone. Truong went on, his voice low but cold as steel. "Behind him, there's someone else, someone he fears, someone pulling the strings. Someone who wanted me gone to clear the path for a much bigger plan. The chief frowned. "You're certain?" Truong nodded without hesitation. "I heard them talking when they thought I was dying." Someone was giving orders. That person didn't show his face, but his voice. I will never forget. He clenched his fists, breathing harder now. His eyes burned with a mix of rage and the fierce need to protect the people he loved. "I'm not just here to report them. I'll lead the way. I'll face them. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my wife and child." The chief held his gaze for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Then, from this moment, we go together." Truong grasped his hand. The firm shake felt like a vow. Outside, the sound of boots echoed through the hall. Officers gathered equipment maps, radios, bulletproof vests, everything being prepared. A manhunt was beginning. But this time, they weren't hunting Truong. They were hunting the ones who tried to erase him. And Truong, with his recovered memory, his unhealed wound, and the fire burning inside him, had only one mission: to end everything. To protect his family. To make sure no one ever had to run again. The rubber forest was so deep, it felt like it swallowed every sound. Cold wind slipped through the tall, straight trunks, carrying the damp, earthy smell of decaying soil. Only the sweeping beams of police flashlights were sharp enough to cut through the thick darkness. Truong stood in the middle of the formation, his breath still heavy, but his eyes razor sharp as he stared ahead. Beneath his feet, the wet ground still held puddles of last night's rain, every step a reminder of the place where he had nearly died. The police chief raised a hand signaling the team to stop. Everyone immediately lowered their voices and crouched. Not far ahead, an old wooden warehouse came into view, the very place Truong had been held captive more than 2 months ago. Rusty tin roof, rotten wooden walls, and faint flickering light leaking through the cracks, proof that someone was inside. The chief whispered, "Target confirmed. Spread out. Surround the perimeter. Hold positions." Silent signals rippled across the group. Flashlights were switched off, replaced by the dim red glow of tactical lights. Figures moved swiftly and quietly, gliding across the ground like shadows. When everyone was in place, the chief raised his arm. "Get ready, go." The wooden door exploded open with a deafening crash. High-beam flashlights shot inside, blinding the men within. Police don't move, but panic had already taken over. 3 thugs scrambled toward the back door, knocking over wooden tables as they ran. One tripped and fell. The other 2 bolted into the darkness. A gunshot fired into the air. Bang! Echoing through the entire forest. "Freeze, hands up." One gang member, the leader, was tackled to the ground and handcuffed in seconds. He writhed helplessly, his face soaked in terror. The chief stepped forward, voice cold as steel. "Talk. Who gave the order to shoot Truong?" The gang leader hung his head, trying to swallow his trembling. Sweat dripped down his forehead even though the night was freezing. I only followed orders," he stammered. "Whose orders?" the chief barked. The man shook harder. He said to finish the job, that if Truong lived, everything would fall apart. "I only did what..." "Who?" The chief's voice cut the air like a blade. The gang leader darted a fearful glance at Truong, then bit his lip hard. "You already know his face. He came here before. He didn't finish. Bang! A bullet sliced through the air, slamming into the wall just inches from his head. Splinters burst everywhere. The man screamed. Everyone down, take cover. Police immediately scattered, forming a shield around Truong. From behind the warehouse, a figure burst out incredibly fast. Cap pulled low black jacket gun still hot in his hand. The chief shouted. Armed suspect cut him off. Footsteps thundered across the forest floor. Flashlights swept wildly over the rows of rubber trees. Truong surged forward, instinctively ignoring the sharp pain ripping through his wounded shoulder. He yelled, his voice cracking with fury. It's him, that's him. There was no doubt the voice he heard while being held captive. The man who gave the order to finish him was the shadow fleeing into the darkness. The chase tore through the forest. Flashlights flickered, slicing through the endless maze of tree trunks. Leaves crunched under boots. Wind whipped against their faces. Police radios crackled like static sparks, everything blending into one breathless pursuit. The fleeing man darted behind a tree, slid down a muddy slope, then veered north. The officers spread wide, trying to corner him, but he moved like someone who knew every inch of the terrain, which only proved one thing. He had been here many times before. The chief shouted into the radio, "Block the west." He's heading for the ridge. Truong ran close behind, breath burning hot in his chest. Rage fueled his legs, stronger than any pain tearing at his shoulder. He won't get away, catch him. Voices echoed through the forest. The fleeing man glanced back for a split second, fear flashing in his eyes, mixed with something vicious. Then he pushed harder, vanishing deeper into the dark. Truong clenched his fists, heart pounding like a drum of war. He knew this wasn't just the man's escape. This was Truong's pursuit of justice. Tonight, every secret would finally come to light. Just before dawn, when mist still clung to every blade of grass, and the bamboo groves swayed gently in the yard, Truong finally returned. The sky had yet to turn into the soft pink of morning. Only the faint golden glow from the wooden house lit his path. The night-long manhunt was over, but inside him, everything had only just begun. His footsteps pressed into the dew-soaked earth. He paused at the steps, breathing heavily but steadily. Every muscle ached, but when he saw Tieunu's silhouette leaning against the doorway, trembling slightly in the morning cold, his eyes lit up with a warmth no pain could dim. She hadn't slept, that was obvious. Her face was pale with worry, eyes swollen from crying hair falling over her shoulders, trembling along with her breaths. But the moment she saw him emerging from the mist, her tears burst out, instantly unstoppable. Truong, just one word, but it carried fear, relief, sorrow, and a release so overwhelming her knees nearly buckled. She ran to him and threw her arms around him, holding him so tightly it was as if letting go for even a second would send him fading back into the darkness again. I was so afraid. Her voice cracked, that you'd disappear again, like last time. Truong felt her whole body shaking in his arms. He placed a hand on her back and pulled her closer, letting his warmth tell her what words couldn't. I'm here, he whispered. I'm right here. In her embrace, Truong noticed the small, sleeping figure of Diêp, head resting on her shoulder. The boy's soft hair was damp with morning mist. His tiny arms wrapped around his mother's neck, as if even in sleep he had been waiting for his father. Truong gently reached out, brushing his fingers through his son's hair. The touch made every wound, every stolen memory, every night spent lost in the forest, drift further away. He bowed his head, placing a hand on his child's back, his voice low and aching. "No one will ever take your father from you again." Lytieunu lifted her gaze. Her eyes glimmered with tears, sparkling softly in the dim light. Truong took her hand, squeezing it with certainty. "No one will break our family apart again." She pressed her lips together, trying to hold back another wave of tears. Truong looked at the two of them, and the fear that once clouded his eyes during his amnesia was gone. Now, he looked like a man who had been pushed off a cliff, yet climbed back stronger, clearer, and more resolute than ever. "I'll protect you both," he murmured, touching his forehead gently to hers. "No matter what." In that moment, all the pain and chaos of the past months lifted away from his shoulders. All that remained was his wife's breath, his child's softness, and the steady beating of his heart in the warmth he once thought he had lost forever. A light breeze swept through the early morning, carrying the scent of fresh wood and damp soil after a long night. Behind them, the wooden door stood slightly open, a warm glow spilling out, enveloping the three of them in a scene that anyone could see was unmistakably home. If this were a film, the camera would slowly pull back, widening the frame until the small wooden house stood alone amid a sea of morning mist. The soft golden light from inside made it stand out gently against the forest, like a single steady flame in the chill of dawn. Leaves rustled softly. The sky brightened gradually, signaling the start of a new day. A new chapter for their family had begun, and somewhere deep within the fading mist ahead, the hunt for the true mastermind was only just beginning.